A sudden rise in cases in China over the weekend sparks unease. One city declared high risk, and Wuhan reports new cases since lockdown was lifted. A whistleblower report to Heilongjiang CDC obtained by NTD shows the cover-up happening inside hospitals. The Chinese regime has been trying to change the narratives of the CCP virus by pushing its mask diplomacy strategy around the world. Today, we take a look at how the strategy works. One of China's most famous human rights lawyers disappeared almost 3 years ago. Now, his wife is calling on the U.S. government to pressure China over his whereabouts. And Hong Kong pro-democracy protests ramped up over the weekend. A sing-along ends with hundreds arrested. Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. One new high-risk region and 3 medium-risk regions have emerged in China over the weekend. The high-risk region is Shulan City in northern China. Authorities there have declared wartime control measures. 2 medium-risk regions are in northern China and one is in Wuhan. According to Chinese state media, there are already 15 confirmed cases in Shulan. The first case was confirmed last week, but it's still unclear how the person got infected. The 14 others are her relatives or people who came into contact with her or her family members. Shulan has upped its virus control measures, locking down all residential areas, banning all non-essential travel, and closing schools again. Eating in restaurants is also banned, only takeout is allowed. The railway station is closed. They'll announce an opening date later. Shulan City Bus Terminal has suspended all routes. This is a video of the Shulan County Hospital. The screen above the entrance asks people from outside Shulan to report if they have a fever or cough. The person taking the video says there are people quarantined in this hospital. The person taking this video says the building is going to be used as a makeshift hospital to quarantine 700 people. Now to Wuhan, the epicenter of the CCP virus. According to state media, on May 10th, there were 5 confirmed cases in the city, all from the same residential block. In China, asymptomatic cases are not counted as confirmed cases, even though they have tested positive for the virus and are capable of infecting others. This video shows a group dressed in protective gear carrying people out of a Wuhan hotel and into ambulances. The person who uploaded the video said there were about 20 people put into 3 ambulances. No local media have reported on the incident. We recently obtained a whistleblower report sent by a medical worker in Qitaihe City in the Heilongjiang Province CDC. The letter reveals that when the letter was written, there were more than 30 CCP virus patients at that hospital, but only 16 cases were reported. He also wrote the wife of the hospital's vice president had a fever but didn't follow infectious disease protocol. As a result, she infected many medical staff and patients. The third thing he mentioned is the hospital took bribes and bought low-quality protective clothing, which broke easily. Medical staff had to use it anyway, putting themselves at risk. The Heilongjiang CDC then forwarded this letter to Qitaihe City in early April. Local authorities wrote a response letter denying the vice president's wife infected medical staff and patients. They also criticized the whistleblower, saying only the expert group should complete epidemic situation reports. No administrative personnel should interfere in the diagnosis and reporting of cases. Taiwan's vice president spoke about the country's success in combating the epidemic in an interview with France 24 on Sunday. Chen Jianren said there were 3 reasons: prudent action, rapid response, early deployment, and successful control. Taiwan has 440 virus cases and only 6 deaths, despite its close proximity to China. Many are calling Taiwan a role model in combating the epidemic. Chen Jianren also touched upon the questions surrounding the virus's origin, saying it's a possibility it came from a lab, but one that must be treated with caution. When asked about the World Health Organization, he reaffirmed Taiwan warned the WHO about human-to-human transmission in Wuhan at the end of December, but the WHO ignored it. He also supported international investigations into the WHO and also called on China to be more transparent. He also warned of a second wave of virus outbreaks. As an epidemiologist, he said a second wave definitely will come, as there's not enough of the population infected currently to achieve herd immunity. He believes the second outbreak will come in fall or winter. One of the most famous human rights lawyers in China has been missing for almost 3 years. His wife is calling on the U.S. government to press the Chinese regime over his whereabouts. NTD's Juliet Song reports.
It's been almost 3 years since this famous human rights lawyer disappeared in China. His wife and fellow activists penned letters calling for the U.S. government to pressure China to reveal his whereabouts. Activists also cast his image in light on the walls of the Chinese consulate in Los Angeles. They fear for his life. His wife posted on Twitter, "My tears are running dry. My heart is like burnt wood. Gao Zhisheng, where are you?" Gao is one of the most prominent human rights lawyers in China. He took on many politically sensitive cases, including those of Falun Gong practitioners, one of the largest spiritual communities persecuted in China. His activism earned him Nobel Peace Prize nominations, and in China it earned him prison sentences and repeated abductions by the state. In 2007, Gao went missing for over 50 days. He said Chinese police used toothpicks and electric batons on his private parts as torture. He later published his experiences. He wrote, "The electric shock baton was put all over me, and my full body, my heart, lungs, and muscles began jumping under my skin uncontrollably. I was writhing on the ground in pain, trying to crawl away. Wang then shocked me in my genitals. My begging them to stop only returned laughing in more unbelievable torture. Wang then used the electric shock baton 3 more times on my genitals while shouting loudly." Even after he was released, memories of torture kept coming back to Gao. In a phone call with a friend after returning from the forced disappearance, he said,
"Sometimes I think of it when I open my eyes at night. Sometimes when I go to do dishes in the kitchen, memories flash back. I'm not talking about how traumatic the vicious torture is. What shocks me the most is that torture like this can exist in broad daylight. And it's done by people who represent China, working in the government, representing us, and exercising power on our behalf. That's the worst part."
After recounting the torture, Gao wrote, "Finally, I want to say a few words which won't be liked by some folks. I want to remind those so-called global good friends, good partners called by the CCP, that the increasing degree of brutality and coldness against the Chinese people by the CCP is the direct result of appeasement by both you and us, our own Chinese people." Gao continued his human rights work and went missing several more times. 3 years ago, he vanished while under house arrest. His wife has not heard from him since. She tried to hire lawyers to look for him, but to no avail.
高志胜确实是一位非常让人敬佩的律师。
Gao Zhisheng is a very admirable lawyer and admirable rights activist. Under such challenging situations, he was still writing articles and drafting a constitution for the future of China. It will really be sad if a brave person like him doesn't get attention from the outside world, from the free world.
Liu said it's critical that Gao's case gets attention and that as a target of the Chinese Communist Party, he could even vanish forever without the attention of free countries. Reporting by Chang Chun and Juliet Song, NTD News.
Since the outbreak began, China has been hoarding medical supplies from around the world. Now that the virus has spread and countries need their own supplies, China has them. NTD's Xu Wenrong has more.
Before the epidemic, China produced about 50% of the world's protective masks. Yet in the first 2 months of the virus outbreak, China shifted from being a mask exporter to the world's biggest importer. According to statistics from Chinese customs, over 2 billion units of epidemic-related goods were imported between January 24th and February 24th. That includes over 1.6 billion masks and nearly 19 million articles of protective clothing. In recent months, China ramped up its mask production. According to the Wall Street Journal, about 85% of the world's supply now comes from China. This leaves many countries dependent on China in a time of need. This also gives the Chinese Communist Party, or CCP, power to decide which countries get medical supplies and which ones do not. The regime has also assumed control over products made in foreign-owned factories. For example, 3M is a leading U.S. producer of masks. Some of its plants are in China. Earlier this year, 3M spokesperson Jennifer Ehrlich said most of its respirators produced in China were being kept for the Chinese market and that local authorities took over handling mask deliveries. When questioned about it, China's Foreign Affairs Ministry said China still needs masks and supply isn't meeting demand. He added that other countries will face difficulties when they try to buy masks from China. Canadian manufacturer Medicom had the same problem, accessing 3 million masks made per day at its Shanghai factory. And Chinese authorities seized 750,000 masks made by Czech company Respiron. After taking all these measures to keep protective equipment inside China, the CCP switched gears. In mid-March, China began sending medical staff and much-needed supplies abroad. It also sent a propaganda message, as Chinese leader Xi Jinping told Germany and France, solidarity and cooperation are the most powerful weapons we have.
So it's essentially extorting or blackmailing the world. It provides what you would call face mask diplomacy.
Shipments overseas were received for ceremonies and publicity, yet often it's unclear if the shipments are commercial deliveries or donations. Italy was the first beneficiary of China's mask diplomacy. It's also the only G7 country to join China's Belt and Road Initiative. When a Chinese cargo plane landed with doctors and equipment in Rome on March 12th, it was presented as a gift to help Italy through its crisis. An Italian reporter, however, discovered that it wasn't a gift, but part of a trade deal formalized a few days earlier. The Chinese regime piggybacked its delivery on a donation from China's Red Cross, which itself is controlled by the CCP. A few days later, Italy agreed to cooperate on a health Silk Road to combat the pandemic. The Chinese regime is also using these opportunities to sow division among Western allies. In Serbia, billboards written in Serbian and Chinese show Xi Jinping with the words, "Thanks, Brother Xi." Then complaining about the lack of the support from the EU, the president said,
"In this situation, we can only trust China."
By now, about a dozen countries have rejected medical masks, virus test kits, and protective gear from China for being contaminated or defective. And as the CCP attempts to portray itself as the world's helping hand, there is increasing pushback against the regime's propaganda efforts. Several countries have complained about Chinese diplomats pushing them to publicly thank China for its international assistance. In Wisconsin, the Chinese consulate sent a letter to State Senate President Roger Roth, asking him to pass a resolution praising China for its transparency and unprecedented and rigorous measures during the epidemic. Senator Roth replied by drafting a resolution calling out the CCP for deliberately and intentionally misleading the world, among other offenses. Reporting by Shuwen Rong, NTD News.
More than 200 people were arrested in Hong Kong during pro-democracy protests across the city on Sunday. A sing-along demonstration at a shopping mall had spilled out onto the streets just before.
Firing pepper pellets and clearing out protesters, Hong Kong authorities arrested more than 200 people during pro-democracy protests after a sing-along demonstration at a shopping mall. Hundreds of riot police were deployed to disperse protesters across the city on Sunday, as protesters chanted for freedom and held up banners calling for revolution. It's one of the first signs of civil unrest returning to Hong Kong, which has largely been put on hold by social distancing restrictions since January. 40-year-old Anok Cha expressed his concerns.
The government has imposed restrictions on gathering and turned it into a crackdown on freedom of assembly, not only for the human rights of citizens, but also for other religious activities. I think this is a gross violation of human rights.
The Hong Kong Journalists Association said some members of the press were prevented from filming, and some journalists who were pepper sprayed were not allowed to receive immediate treatment. 18 people were taken to hospital. The recent arrest of democracy activists has revived the pro-democracy movement, just as the city has begun easing its social distancing restrictions.
For many state governors and U.S. officials, virus testing is an important step towards reopening America. The Trump administration today announced $11 billion will go to states to help with that.
This week, more than 10 million Americans will be tested, according to senior administration officials. That's over 1 million more than last week.
I think it's clear that America does lead the world in testing. I'll go through some of the charts that show that we lead quantitatively.
And he says the percent of people testing positive for the virus is going down. With that, America is moving ahead with reopening, and now states are mapping out plans for ramping up testing, with help from the administration.
The federal government is also supporting states with vital supplies, quick approvals of new tests, and one-on-one coaching from the team here at the White House on how to increase capacity and increase it very quickly.
Trump said the government is sending the states $11 billion dedicated to testing. The money is part of the CARES Act, an over $2 trillion economic relief fund to help Americans get through the pandemic. The Trump administration is now connecting suppliers with each state to make sure they meet their individual testing goals for the month. Testing capacity in the U.S. has increased by 100% over the past 3 weeks, and Trump says it will go up substantially, saying America and Germany are now leading the world in testing. Melina Weiskup, NTD News.
Governor Cuomo announced today that the state of New York will start to partially reopen later this week, but he's asking people to act modestly and try to keep virus spread down.
Governor Cuomo said on Monday that New York State is planning to start reopening on May 15th as long as virus numbers keep trending downward.
And now we can intelligently turn towards reopening. And that's May 15th. That's this Friday.
He added that as of now, the numbers have passed their peak.
In terms of where we are, total hospitalizations are down again. That net change is down again. The net change in intubations is down again. The number of lives lost, still too high, obviously at 161, but better than it has been. So we see all the arrows are pointed in the right direction.
State officials had previously been concerned. Early predictions suggested that New York would need 120,000 hospital beds at some point. Cuomo said that would have made the situation in Italy look like a walk in the park. He added that the government couldn't have enforced all these restrictions without New Yorkers understanding and following the rules. Now Cuomo is asking people and businesses to keep up social distancing, even as the state reopens, to help avoid the risk of a second outbreak.
New York City's Mayor Bill de Blasio says he's hiring non-police ambassadors to enforce social distancing. Violent scenes of police enforcing the measures have been caught in video. New York also has new rules for nursing homes.
De Blasio says New York City will now use non-police social distancing ambassadors after ugly clashes involving police enforcement of social distancing rules were caught on camera and spread online.
But more and more of the emphasis will be on a communicative, encouraging approach through these social distancing ambassadors.
He acknowledged things got out of hand with the previous approach of having police enforce social distancing.
We certainly have seen one video in particular, and there have been some others that have raised concern, and I think they pull at people in a very real and painful way.
He also spoke about cases of CCP virus-related illnesses discovered in children, following New York Governor Cuomo's news about 2 young children and a teenager who died. Mayor de Blasio said doctors are now calling the condition pediatric multisystem inflammatory syndrome. Medical staff are discovering more and more cases of it.
As of today, there have been 38 cases detected here in New York City. That's up from 15 at the last count. There are 9 more cases that the specifics of the case are still pending.
New York is also requiring all nursing home staff to be tested twice weekly for the CCP virus. The state will now no longer allow sending CCP virus patients from hospitals directly back to nursing homes. The state faced criticism for a March 25th Health Department directive requiring nursing homes to take recovering CCP virus patients.
Factories in Michigan are now free to resume production. The governor's orders today mean automakers can bring back thousands of idled employees.
Factories in Michigan received the green light Monday to get back to work. The Midwest manufacturing powerhouse, which serves as a major hub for auto production, is reopening after a more than 6-week shutdown. This is seen as the first major step toward resuming production next week and bringing back thousands of idled workers this month. Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer has been under pressure to reopen factory floors as other parts of the auto supply chain sought to resume operations. Ohio, another key auto factory state, announced it would permit manufacturing to reopen as of last Monday. And Mexico is expected to make an announcement this week. But all of that was in jeopardy if Michigan dragged its feet, since key parts suppliers for the industry are located in and around the state's auto hub of Detroit. Getting the auto sector back on its feet could help restart the overall U.S. economy. The auto sector accounts for 6% of all economic output and is responsible for more than 800,000 jobs. But even as factories reopen, that doesn't mean all those employees are immediately going back to work. There are still the issues of social distancing on the factory floor, a statewide extension of requiring residents to remain mostly indoors, and then there's the big question of demand. With the economy in free fall, most Americans aren't likely in the mood to buy a new car, which should translate to less new vehicle production and fewer workers needed on the factory floor.
Social distancing is also a concern for building sites as they start to reopen. One site in D.C. has had to put measures in place before others. Its school project is deemed essential, so work there has already started again.
One building company in Washington, D.C. got a head start experimenting with what a return to work may look like. MCN Build's school project was deemed essential during lockdown.
100% face coverings, hand sanitizer stations on every project, hand washing stations on every project, the sign-in process, the questionnaire, the COVID questionnaire, temporal scanning, all those are new since COVID-19.
After arriving, workers need to patiently line up for a temperature screening. Then they're asked if they have virus symptoms or if they may have been exposed to the virus. Tasks have also been redesigned to minimize transmission risk.
For the most part, we enforce social distancing, but as you can see, there's guys who cannot. Per their job or per task. It's just not possible 100% of the time.
MCN hired a hygiene auditing firm to make sure all necessary measures were in place. Workers now wear even more personal protective equipment.
It's been really difficult because keeping the mask on all day and working in the humidity fogs up your safety goggles, and it's hard. It's really hard.
But despite the risks and challenges, workers on site are relieved to be back at work.
The restrictions are worth it because we have to work. We have to take the daily bread home, and like many people, we live paycheck to paycheck. We need to work.
D.C. hoped to reopen on May 15th, but the mayor said Friday that's not likely anymore.
South Korean officials scrambled on Monday to contain a new virus outbreak, leading the country to reconsider plans to open schools.
A new outbreak of coronavirus cases in South Korea has sent officials scrambling to stop its spread in the densely populated capital city of Seoul. Officials reported over 30 new infections across the country as of midnight on Sunday, the highest daily numbers in more than a month. The country has been lauded for its early action in slowing the pandemic, but on Sunday, President Moon Jae-in warned of a second wave.
It's not over until it's over, while keeping enhanced alertness till the end. We must never lower our guard regarding epidemic prevention.
Most of the recent infection cluster was linked back to a slew of clubs and bars in the popular nightlife district of Itaewon, many of which cater to members of the LGBTQ community. That has raised complications for officials desperately trying to track down new infections in a nation where open homosexuality is often taboo. Authorities had tested 4,000 people, but were still trying to track down around 3,000 more. Seoul Mayor Park Won-soon has pleaded with clubgoers to be tested, warning that anyone avoiding testing could be fined.
The next 2 or 3 days will be a critical moment which decides if Seoul will be infiltrated or not. If Seoul was infiltrated, the Republic of Korea will be infiltrated.
The outbreak has prompted Seoul to impose an immediate temporary shutdown of all nightly entertainment facilities, just as the country began easing some social distancing restrictions last week.
And authorities have proposed to delay the reopening of schools, which was scheduled to begin on Wednesday.
And today in our global roundup, Russia's numbers are still on the rise as the country experiences a late outbreak. The UK is gradually reopening, while Germany reports that a second wave is spreading.
A new surge in virus cases took Russia's tally past those in Italy and the UK. According to official figures, it's now the third highest in the world. More than half of all cases and deaths are in Moscow. The UK's Prime Minister Boris Johnson has a plan to get Britain back to work. He says that the challenge now is to find a way that preserves what he calls the hard-won gains, while easing the burden of the lockdown. That includes keeping up social distancing practices and avoiding public transportation whenever possible. Global alarm was sounded over a potential second wave of the virus. The news comes after Germany reported another rise of infections. The country's reproduction rate, known as the number of people each person with the disease infects, is said to be back at 1.1. That means every infected person infects more than one other person. South Korea donated 2 million masks to the U.S. as the nation continues to face shortages. The U.S. ambassador to South Korea expressed his thanks on Twitter, writing that the alliance between the two nations is as strong as it was 70 years ago. And the number of virus cases in the 6 Gulf Arab states surpassed 100,000 on Monday. Infections in the region had initially been linked to travel, but despite taking prevention measures early, Gulf states have still seen virus spread among low-income migrant workers.
In Croatia, oyster farmers are feeling waves of anxiety. Lockdown restrictions have brought the food and travel industry to an economic standstill, leaving these vendors with no money and lots of excess oysters.
Like many countries, Croatia has closed its restaurants and imposed travel bans as part of its effort to stop the spread of the CCP virus. That means oyster farmers have been cut off from their primary consumers, tourists and restaurant goers. The huge drop in demand has put a financial strain on oyster farmers, and now some are simply looking to ride this out.
I think if we can at least cover the costs and somehow manage to finance the next season to be able to prepare to produce, I think we would be satisfied.
Lazic has received help in the form of subsidies. But despite this, there are still some things that can't be helped. Maria Radic says that the arrival of summer will lead to a large amount of money going down the drain.
There is likely to be a large loss during the summer, as oysters are a sensitive product that doesn't stand up well to high salinity and heat.
But there appears to be a pearl of hope. Croatia has allowed for bars and restaurants to reopen, provided they follow strict hygiene rules. Oyster farmers expect that the reopening will help restore some of the demand that was lost.
Here at China in Focus, we dedicate ourselves to bringing you truthful, unbiased reporting. Don't forget to subscribe for the latest updates, and see you tomorrow.